We begin our report in Texas, where the two presidential frontrunners traveled to the U.S.-Mexico border. President Biden visited Brownsville, while former President Donald Trump was more than 300 miles away in Eagle Pass. Biden once again called on House Republicans to help secure the border by passing the Senate's bipartisan bill. In turn, Trump blamed Democrats and migrants for the crisis that has become a top issue among voters in the 2024 race, according to polling. CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe is traveling with the president in Texas.
The president and the former president who wants to replace him in the White House played the blame game today along the U.S.-Mexico border.
This is a Biden invasion over the past 3 years.
President Biden said it was Donald Trump who urged House Republicans to kill the bill that would have beefed up security at the border.
It's time for the speakers and some of my Republican friends in Congress who are blocking this bill to show a little spine.
After a record number of illegal crossings last year, President Biden, who toured the border in Brownsville, Texas, is trying to show he's addressing an issue that more than 60% of voters call a very serious concern.
Just hours before the president's arrival here in Brownsville, U.S. Border Patrol and Texas State Police say they stopped people on the other side of the border from bringing across drugs.
But Chris Cabrera of the Border Patrol said that with illegal crossings into this part of Texas down recently, the president has come too late.
But I think the timing's a little off. I mean, if he would have come a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago.
Trump, who visited Eagle Pass more than 300 miles away, continued exploiting a crisis that he couldn't solve either, hoping it'll put him back in the White House. Allies say he's planning mass deportations and detention camps, if elected. Today, he sought to falsely connect President Biden to the recent murder of a Georgia nursing student by a Venezuelan migrant who entered the country illegally in 2022.
The monster that charged in the death is an illegal alien migrant who was led into our country and released into our communities by crooked Joe Biden.
The president, who didn't address Trump's attacks, said they should work together.
Join me, or I'll join you, in telling the Congress to pass this bipartisan border security bill. We can do it together.
As president, Trump severely restricted asylum and required migrants to await their court hearings in Mexico. When President Biden took office, he reversed those policies, but is now considering employing an executive power used by Trump to suspend asylum. The former president also met with Texas Governor Greg Abbott today, who's at war with the Biden administration for implementing his own border crackdown, installing National Guard troops, and razor wire barriers in Eagle Pass. But we spoke to local resident Adam Rodriguez, who says concerns there are overblown.
We've raised our kids here, and there's never been any criminal element. You don't have to worry about walking down the street.
And now Ed joins me, along with CBS News immigration reporter Camilo Montoya-Galvez, who's in Eagle Pass, where the former president visited Thursday. Ed, the president could talk about his possible executive order or talk about that bipartisan legislation. He talked about the bipartisan legislation. Is there a larger goal here that goes beyond the border in terms of trying to make a case against Donald Trump and the Republicans in Congress and what they can and can't get done?
I think there is, John, after what we witnessed today. It was a pretty substantive briefing that the president was given in public and in front of reporters. The president trying to demonstrate he's studying up on this. He's listening to those on the front lines who are dealing with it, who are asking Congress to provide more funding and manpower to not only deal with the situation along the border, but then to process those hundreds of thousands of asylum claims that take years to get through the system. Contrast that with the former president who went to see his ally, Governor Abbott, along the border, where they spent most of the time criticizing the current president for doing things the former president had tried to do and unsuccessfully achieved, and then falsely tied the president to the murder of that college student in Georgia. He had nothing to do with it personally, even if the immigration system allowed that guy to get through the cracks. Provided no substantive suggestion directly, explicitly, other than the fact that we know, as we reported, that he is considering again the mass deportation of migrants and possibly, other more draconian steps that had been rejected by the courts and by even members of his own party in the past.
Camilo, it's now the end of February. Where do things stand in terms of the metrics that you watch so closely compared to that record number we saw in December? What's the temperature of things?
Well, John, the migration flows here along the U.S.-Mexico border have changed dramatically over the past 2 months. In December, a record 300,000 migrants were processed by U.S. border officials. That number dropped by 50% in January. It has slightly increased in February, but it is still very much low compared to 2023, when a record number of migrants entered U.S. border custody, many of them with the intention of seeking asylum. There has been another shift here, and that is in terms of where migrants are crossing. Ed alluded to this, John, but now most migrant crossings are concentrating mainly in Arizona and California, not here in Texas. And Texas Governor Greg Abbott is attributing that drop here in illegal crossings in Texas to his actions and his policies, including the razor wire, some of which you can see behind me, that he has ordered his National Guard soldiers to deploy along the Rio Grande to deter illegal crossings. But Governor Abbott suffered a defeat in federal court today. A federal judge in Austin blocked SB 4. That was a Texas state immigration law that would have given authorities here the power to arrest, jail, and prosecute migrants for crossing into Texas illegally from Mexico. The judge said that that is a federal responsibility, John.
And quickly, Camilo, you've been there so many times at the border. What could these candidates or the ones at president, of course, but learn from being at the border? I mean, obviously, these are spectacle, but what could they actually learn by going there?
Well, look, John, former President Trump and President Biden both came here to the Texas border to essentially blame each other for the country's longstanding and vexing immigration challenges. So these events were very political in nature, and we have an election coming up where immigration is a top issue. But hopefully President Biden and former President Trump learn here today that any solutions here to the crisis along the border, any durable solution, has to be bipartisan and has to be codified into law by Congress. Otherwise, the actions that they will take are at risk of being reversed by their successors, other presidents with opposing political views, or are at risk of being challenged in federal court, just like this law in Texas. So that is something that I think many residents here will encourage these presidents and candidates to do, to come together to the bargaining table and to forge an agreement on this highly contested issue.
Ed, final question to you. How much concern was there, and it was illustrated in your piece, that folks on the border, or maybe just voters anywhere, might say it's a little late for the president, and that his initial response to the border contributed to the problem, and he's showing up after the horse is out of the barn?
There's a considerable concern for that here, and I would also question, I think Camilo would too, given how trends have shifted west. Why come here when you could have gone to Arizona, where now the situation's most acute? Democratic governor there dealing with that, a swing state. Why not take up the issue there instead? It's unclear, and this trip came together quite quickly. This is a president who's been allergic to the issue, John. In many ways, he's still learning about it, the ins and outs of it. And that's part of why this briefing today was so stark, because it demonstrated he's trying to shine some light on the concerns of those in the Homeland Security Department, but also to some extent still himself embracing an issue that he, as a senator from the Mid-Atlantic and as a vice president that dealt with foreign policy, never really had to deal with this one, and gets angry, we know, when it's brought up to him by aides in the West Wing, knowing it's just one of those intractable, unsolvable great challenges that Washington has to deal with. Let's see if he continues to make visits like this, and notably also, let's see if he actually meets with migrants who are coming, or those that advocate for them. He's not done that. Yeah. Were he to, he might score some points within his own party among people concerned about those that make the journey.
Ed O'Keefe and Camilo Montoya-Galvez for us, both of them at the southern border. Thank you, gentlemen.